This is the Unrationed Podcast. My name is Evan Chasteen,
I'm Josh Randa.
And I am Tony Albrecht.
and we begin every podcast the same way by talking about our wild moments from the week. We skipped a week, so I guess we've got 2 weeks to pull from here. Which one of you would like to start with a wild moment?
Me?
Josh wants to. Yeah, he
Okay.
had some pretty wild moments.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I feel like I've had quite a few over the last 2 weeks. I'm gonna go with the Grand Canyon. That was definitely pretty awesome. So me and a buddy, his name's James Dice. Every quarter we get together and we do a quarterly business review. So we kind of unpack everything that's going on within our companies, and we normally do like a little adventure. And so this time he came down to Arizona because I was already down there. We went up to the Grand Canyon, and we hiked down into the canyon down to Phantom Ranch. So it was like 8 miles, dropped about 5,000 feet, hung out there, and then came back up. But I think just we watched this like 8-minute video at the visitor center, and the oldest rock that is found in the Grand Canyon is like 1.8 billion years old, which is just friggin' insane. So to like go down each layer, and each layer of rock, that iconic rock, is like 100 million years or 200 million years. It just blows my mind. So
And you're talking
problems
about the
kinda
rock,
what's
like
that?
the layer of Earth, not like I guess it could be also a rock that you hold in your hand.
Yeah, like the layer of Earth essentially. But yeah, there's it, it's chipped off and there's different rocks. But yeah, it's pretty cool. That seemed pretty wild.
Yeah, thinking about time in that long of span can really mess with my mind
Yeah.
from time to time. Tony, wild moment.
Last week, I had the pleasure of joining my teammate Josh in Arizona for our annual sprint. And I'm going to bring up when we went out for a little hike, Josh's idea, the middle of the afternoon. And you've picked a perfect time for a hike in the desert when you show up to the place just outside Phoenix and there are no cars in the parking lot on like a perfect day because it's like 105 degrees out. And just we did about 4 miles. There were 6 of us, I think, and it was intense. Beautiful trail. You get kind of up into the hills a little bit, 20-foot tall cacti and whatnot. And it was my first time in a number of years out in that kind of heat. And the impact it has on you is a reminder that where it's like you get up on the hill and you can still see Phoenix out there, but you are out there in that heat with that sun in a way that was decidedly uncivilized. Where very quickly your focus and turns to how you're doing, how your body's feeling, how much water you're getting, how much water other people are getting, how other people are feeling. And you're watching the heat take its toll on different people in different ways. And we were just out there for, I think it was about 2 hours.
Yeah.
But it was, it was an intense reminder of the power of nature. Evan, how about you?
Cut down some tree limbs in my backyard. I'm more and more finding my wild moments had to do with just being outside in my yard. And a couple of them were high, and my focus was very focused because they were dangerous tree limbs. There were a couple times I was wondering if I was I should have just called somebody to get them. So after we cut down the tree limbs, we also did a fire to burn them all. And that was really, it was a spontaneous fire. So we didn't plan to burn the brush pile at that time, my wife and I, but we did. And there was something about lighting a fire spontaneously that felt wild. because it is so close to our house, and it was in a pine straw area, so we had the hose out and we're wetting the ground, and somebody always was manning the hose. Like we had to be very focused to do that in a safe way, arguably safe, I guess. Somebody could still say that it maybe wasn't, but I felt prepared and spontaneous at the same time. Whenever that happens, it's a really cool feeling to know what to do, but also not having a plan. So let's get to the episode. I picked up this book. If you're on YouTube, you can see it. It's called On the Threshold of Transformation, Daily Meditations for Men. It's by Richard Rohr, who's been an incredibly impactful influence in my life, kind of introducing me to, I think, one of the concepts that he introduces with this book, which is mythologizing our lives as men. And he borrows heavily from Joseph Campbell, it seems, with the hero's journey. But I wanted to read a couple things from just the introduction to this book, because it seems to touch on several of our episodes up to this point. So I'm going to read a couple things and then let's riff on them. This is how he starts, like at part one, beginning of part one. If we don't learn to mythologize our lives, inevitably we pathologize them. Go.
Rock and roll. Evan, you and I were talking about how I've started blowing through The Power of Myth, which is Joseph Campbell's a series of TV shows he did with Bill Moyers in, like, I think it was in the 80s. And mythology isn't something I spend a whole lot of time thinking about. And it's got me thinking about it. And I think what you're or that line, if we don't mythologize our lives, we pathologize them. That's actually the line. It's got me thinking about that differently. That one thing that Campbell says in there is that we actually always do have a mythology, that our mythology is simply the story framework through which we view the world. And historically, we've had, going way back, it seemed like, because our understanding as a species of the world around us and how things work, and physics and astrology and all those sorts of astrology. I meant astronomy, didn't I?
Astronomy, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I
Astrology
meant.
would
I
be
did
more
not mean
mythological.
astrology. That people made up stories to provide meaning and structure, psychological structure. And see that now that we have learned so much so quickly as a species, a lot of those old stories don't fit the modern time, or at least we feel like they don't. And
can I clarify something? Interrupt you and clarify something?
Please, yeah.
You said they made up stories, and I don't know that Joseph Campbell would take that perspective in particular. I think these stories came from somewhere, because he's finding the same stories very far apart from one another. So we have stories within us, I would say, all of us. Mm-hmm. And as maybe many societies began to form, as people groups began to structure in some way, shape, or form, these stories, there were certain people who were able to put words and images to these stories in a way that spoke to other people in timeless ways, like outside of specific cultural contexts. So that was just my note of that. Nobody was making them up. I don't think Joseph Campbell would take that stance, is what I'm saying.
It's a worthwhile distinction. And by makeup, I simply mean applying images, or you are making up a story, like the actual narrative of the thing. What Campbell does talk about how in such different places, in such different peoples, the same basic narratives arise, right? And even a lot of the details remain the same, right? To your point. And it, yeah, what I'm getting at is simply that um, that the stories are true in a psychological sense, or in a sense of providing the meaning without, being actual historical events. And I want to juxtapose that with where we are today, where if you were to ask somebody, you could ask me, like, what is your mythology today that you go through the world with? I'm inclined to say I don't have one. And I think that would be a common response, is that we don't have mythology anymore. We don't have myths because we have science and we have facts and we have information, and we could just know things that are true, because we have all this information. And it confuses what mythology is, since we do have, and this is um like Sapiens. I'm blanking on Harari's full name, but yeah, one thing he articulates in that book so wonderfully is that our superpower as a species really is our ability to share uh, our imaginings. That we're able to concoct shared narratives and shared metaphors and a mythology that then can allow us to trust one another and cooperate, right? And that's really where humanity's power has come from, right?
Josh, what you got?
Well, first off, I feel like I have to tell you, when you said the clarification, I feel like I've talked to a few people that have listened to the podcast, and they're like, sometimes the context that Evan brings is just insane, like just like sharpens everything up. So I feel like that was one of those moments where it's like a really impressive gift. So
Oh,
thank
well,
you for
thank you.
that. The immediate riffing that came to mind was when we were in the Grand Canyon, and like thinking about looking at my watch versus looking at the summit of like the Grand Canyon. And so we're like hiking, and there's all this like literature around like zone 2 and like keeping your heart rate in that area, and you can go all day long. And it's like it makes you want to govern yourself, to like Tony's point, this like science of how we walk through life. And that's kind of like what was popping into my mind in terms of like pathology, where we have like this scientific approach to everything, as opposed to letting these myths be our compass and guiding us to a spot that only we can navigate in life, I guess. But relying on the different stories, the different meanings behind all these things that we hear. So that was the first thing that came to mind.
Yeah, I'm
Watches and
gonna.
summits.
Yeah, there's something to. So as you're saying that, the science also has a point where it doesn't know, and it seems as though mythology meets science really neatly there. So I think they play very well together, and it's like, I don't want it to sound like we're pitting
Yeah,
science
it's good.
versus mythology. Uh, they go together quite neatly at a certain point, with either at the point where kind of both meet mystery, uh, because I do think proper healthy mythology is always pointing beyond itself, like using symbols to point to something beyond the symbol itself. And science is always pointing towards truth. Then, and we're like ever approaching that. It seems, I think I've used this on another episode, but it seems like science is an asymptote where we're approaching truth via facts, but it's ever approaching, like infinitely. Like we may never be able to actually touch it via the scientific method, and that's probably heavily debated as well. Tony, what were you gonna say?
Um, well, there's the scientific, and then there's the technological, and I think those things are slightly different, and they're both greatly informing where we're at today. But as we're riffing here, it's worth articulating what our mythologies look like. And the main one that comes to mind for me, from our context as Americans, is that mythology of the American dream, which has become sort of this conventional path to success. I don't think about it as mythology, but it's that go to school, get good grades, do extracurriculars, get a job, get the better job, get the house, get the family. Like that whole trajectory is a myth. And to your original line about, and we're going to end up riffing on one line for the whole thing, aren't we? That if we lose the mythology, it turns into pathology. I think that that myth that I certainly have operated with for much of my life gets at the heart of that line. Whereas like that was pathological, because that myth leads one to chase things that don't achieve the desired result. It's like if the purpose of mythology is to give us some framework for understanding the world, our place in it, meaning, what to pursue to have a life well lived, how many books and movies and examples from our own lives do we need to see that the American dream as we understand it doesn't cut it on those bigger questions? Like, so many of us can follow that myth and achieve it. Like we do. I countering your point of the asymptotic nature of science. The American dream is something where you can achieve it, and so many of us do. And then you say, "Is this it? Is it?" And it speaks to that pathological dynamic.
Okay,
Evan.
so the whole intro here, before reading any of day one, was about the inner journey, and as it seems as though as men, we get very caught up in the outer journey. So what I propose is that somebody could actually live the outer journey of the American dream and also have a very deep and rich inner journey.
For sure.
We're sitting in home offices with a wife and 2 kids apiece, with good jobs, owning a business. Like I would argue that we're like pretty closely living out what we all, I think, would criticize as the highest achievement, or what should be the highest achievement. And I think spending time on the inner journey is where Rohr is pointing us here. So I'm going to read this passage from the intro. After 20 years of working with men on retreats and rites of passage, in spiritual direction, and even in prison, it has sadly become clear to me how trapped the typical Western male feels. He is trapped inside, with almost no inner universe of deep meaning to heal him or guide him. Historically, this is exactly what spirituality meant by losing your soul. It did not happen later or after death unless it first happened here. For centuries, males have been encouraged and rewarded for living an outer life of performances, which are usually framed in terms of win or lose. So he kind of continues to go down that. And so the distinction I think you're drawing, Tony, is that there's this inner journey that sometimes mirrors the outer journey, and mythology is meant to take us inside as much as it is to take us outside. Josh, do you have any thoughts?
Yes, but I'm still formulating them.
Great,
I have
great.
a lot of thoughts.
Okay, can I read? Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I was just going to say that that's fantastic. And the problem with the American dream mythology is not the thing itself, right? It is that thing you're referring to, that when we put that up on the pedestal as the ideal, that is the thing worth pursuing, and we ignore the internal spiritual journey, then we get to we can achieve that external thing, at which point we realize that we forgot to bring along the most essential piece of ourselves, which is that spiritual component. And then only then do we uh, take ourselves on the internal journey. So yeah.
The word that keeps coming to mind is disordered or ordered. Like, right. So our outer journey can either be ordered or disordered with our inner journey. And to your point, like, I feel very fortunate on the path that I'm currently on. I love my life, but there's times where I have a really, like, I'm trying to pinpoint moments where I have an inner tension with my outer journey and trying to like really distill down when those conflicts are. And it is when you're seeking to be elevated, not to see, but rather to be seen. It's those times where you're like, yeah, this isn't in harmony with what I'm trying to pursue. And almost aligning my internal behaviors or internal thoughts with this external facing approach. So yeah, that passage it hits home in that balancing act, that nurturing of the outer journey and like bringing it in to make sure it's aligned and ordered to, what we're pursuing as a human being inside.
I'm going to read part of day one, which is titled The Male Journey. I think it touches on much of what we're trying to talk about here. At some point, a man needs to embark on a risky journey. It's a necessary adventure that takes him into uncertainty, and it almost always involves some difficulty or failure. On this journey, the man learns to trust God more than he trusts a sense of right and wrong or his own sense of self-worth. We find this story arc in countless myths, fairy tales, and legends. A man leaves the comfort of his own home only to return and rediscover home. And as T.S. Eliot wrote, know it for the first time. We tend to take refuge in the static world of ideas and opinions, and we look for meaning in jobs and careers. Often we mistake the roles we play for authentic living, but eventually a man begins to sense that something is missing. He may experience this call to awareness as a beckoning whisper, a powerful dream, or a sudden and stark life change. But no matter how it shows up, it needs to be heeded. And then the question he leaves with this, maybe day one is this podcast. Do I feel a vague call to something more? And am I willing to pay attention? And I remember very specific times in my life, and I'm going to take this question seriously at this time in my life as well. I don't think it ends. But they were crucial times in my life where I did feel called to something more, even if it was a vague call to something more. Like doing all the things that I was supposed to do led me to a place that I questioned. And there was a inner tension, to use your words, Josh, that felt like a call to something more. And I think there's a reason this is day one, awakening to that call or acknowledging that feeling as something that's real and okay within us, that doesn't need to be immediately solved, or there's not a game to win by answering that question. It does seem like a journey that needs to be embarked on. That, to me, I would use these words to describe what we're doing with Wilds in the Woods.
It's true that we never arrive. That ultimately, it seems that's the shift in thinking that that makes all the difference. Evan, when you say that the three of us are in pretty good places personally, professionally, that's right. And I think that one thing the three of us have in common is, and for me, this is certainly through trial and error and big errors, but I learned the hard way that there was no destination, that cliche about it's about the journey, not the destination, it's true. It is it is actually true. And if you put your hope in the destination, you're going to be disappointed, either because you fail to get there or because you get there and you realize that it's only one point along the way, and then the journey continues.
Which that in and of itself is the journey. Like I wouldn't take that away from any man, like arriving at the destination and feeling that disappointment. This isn't meant to tell you to not go after that thing. It's like a, hey, when you get there, you'll realize something deeply within you, that that thing isn't the thing, and that there's something deeper within you that is the thing.
Yeah. And well, and the shift in thinking for me is that rather than thinking that's the end, that like that's the point where you get there and that's like, oh, there's no more things. I found all the things. It's instead a point for concerting energy, right? It's a point for like, I'm aiming for that one. And Josh talks and writes about this in how he thinks about climbing mountains. That there's something about the summit that focuses your attention and your energy, that I'm trying to get there. But then you're not staying there. You're then, number one, you got to go get back down. But then also you're seeing in the distance the next thing, right? That it's like, it is just a point along the journey. And there's value in those points. And celebrating them and, reaching for them. But yeah, and it's always how do we make the most of this moment?
The beauty of this too is I think the points are up and down. Like the inverse shape of what you're talking about is also true. It's Rohr that says oftentimes we're led to inner transformation through great love and great suffering. So I think what you're talking about is a great love transformation. There's also great suffering transformations by choice or not by choice that are brought about by our choice or completely outside of our control. So it seems as though this content, this podcast, what we're doing, it will be most relevant to somebody who's touched great love or touched great suffering in some way. And if you haven't touched either of those things, this probably just misses the mark completely. Like doesn't have anywhere to land inside. I would say
we're just nerds.
There's two things that come to mind. I used to, before Mission Matters group, I had this like contracting gig at a military base doing some technology consulting, and they had like those cliche posters all over the place, like, leadership and like some like tagline or whatever. But there was this one poster that said, in the pursuit of being better or best, don't forget about just being. I was like, dang, that's pretty good. And so, 14 years later, that thing still comes to mind all the time.
Do you remember the picture that was with it?
No, it was kind of like this like impressionist painting. Like I can't remember exactly what it was, but I can remember like the text and how it was written.
Yeah.
But it didn't attribute it to anybody. It said unknown. And I was like, dang. But anyways. And the other one, when Tony was talking just about like thinking about the next destination. So I heard this like spiritual reflection talking about where the devil plays in our lives. And it's either in the future because it can like play with our anxieties, or in the past, which stokes our shame, something that we did in the past. And that robs you from this present moment. And that just like super, like it just crystallized things. Cause like for me, I'm usually thinking like 2, 10, 30 years out or whatever about different things. And there is that some of those things about what I need to plan for are anxiety provoking, right? And it just robs me from this moment and my path, my next step right now. And then of course, just like Tony shares, I got plenty of, demons in my closet still that I'm still trying to process, but it plays on that, that shame. But I thought that was a really helpful framing just to you got to fight both fronts so that you can, protect that current moment.
Yep. All right. This feels like a good place to end. Do you guys agree?
Word.
All right. Let's wrap it up then. Thanks for listening to the Unrationed podcast. If you'd like to join us for Wild 32, which is going to start up again, did we plan one?
We said after my birthday, which was yesterday. So like next week.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
And next week?
I think we should do it next week.
Cool. Well, then that's like the time this podcast reaches the world. We're starting up a Wild 32 this week. And if you'd like to join us on it, we'd love to have you.
You have 4 minutes to decide.
Yeah, wildsinthewoods.com. We're also on YouTube now. If you're listening to this, go to YouTube, search Wilds and the Woods. Peace out.
Bye.